thinking about the word great and what it means, particularly in the idea of making something great. And this isn't just coming from the well-known slogan by a certain president-elect about making America great again, although we'll come on to that, but more generally about what greatness is and what the cost of greatness might be, and are we willing to pay those costs. This was prompted actually not by thinking about Donald Trump, but watching Triumph of the Will, the Leni Riefenstahl documentary from the 1930s about the Nuremberg rallies. Because at one point in that there's a reference made to the Great War, which we would now call the First World War, but used to be called the Great War. In fact, when I was growing up, we had a book in my house called The Great War, which is a collection of photographs from that time. And when I was growing up, I wasn't quite sure what the title meant. Did it mean that the First World War was big, in the way that we talk about Greater Manchester, I mean a big version of Manchester area, or Great Britain, which is kind of an extended version of an understanding of what Britain might be, spread across the whole of this particular island, including Scotland and Wales? Or is it great in terms of fantastic and cool and something to celebrate? No, I'm still not quite sure what it meant, but because there's a bit of slippage between those terms, isn't there, or between those understandings of the term. I mean, we know, if you open the dictionary, you'd find both those terms separately, one meaning something like big and one meaning something like desirable. But in day-to-day use, we slip between them really routinely. I'm thinking about here something like the Great British Bake Off, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a cookery show here in the UK. It's a really good show, I really like it. But Great British Bake Off there, we're supposed to take the word great in both its possible meanings, aren't we? It takes place in Great Britain, and it's also great, you know, because Britain is great, apparently. So just in the way we think about the word great, I think it isn't as clear cut as the dictionary would suggest. But greatness is weird in other ways, I think. I mean, just to return briefly to the Make America Great Again, or Make Redruth Great Again, many people have said this before, I'm certainly not original in this, but you know, when you say a thing like that, you've got to think about who you're talking to, what you mean by great, and what you mean by again, haven't you, really? Because you know, what one person thinks is great might not be good for other people, and this period of time in the past in which things were great but they are no longer is going to differ from person to person. So many people have critiqued that slogan, Make America Great Again, as being a kind of harking back to some idyllic post-war, I guess, 1950s version of America. 2.4 kids, everybody had a car, 2 cars, lots of money and knocking about. If you were relatively privileged, that was fine, that was probably a great time to be alive. But if you were black, or if you were gay, or if you were another member of an underclass, it probably wasn't so great, and you might not think it's something you want to go back to again. So that so great in that sense is not quite so simple, is it, really? What does it mean to make anywhere great again? What kind of golden age are you really harking back to in that sense? But the other thing I was thinking about in terms of great was to do with, as I said, the cost of greatness, the price of greatness. However you define what great might be. And I've got a couple of references here. The first is a short story, I think, by Ursula K. Le Guin, who's a science fiction writer, I guess you call her. She's a beautiful writer, she makes fantastic stuff. But she did a short story called something like, not quite sure here, The Ones Who Walk Away from Almanas, something like that. I'll find it and put it in the description anyway. But it's this story about a utopian society, a great society in many ways, depending on what you mean by great, as I say. It's not very technologically advanced, so it might not be great in some people's views. It's not very, well, I don't know, it's not, as I say, not advanced in the way that we would perhaps associated with greatness. But on the other hand, people are very happy. People love living there. You know, there's lots of freedom, there's lots of happiness, everybody's happy all the time, you know, it's great in that sense. So for some people that would be utopian, that would be a great place to live. But the kicker in this is that somewhere in one part of this society there's a cellar, and in this cellar There's a child, and the child is locked up in this cellar, in the dark, in the damp, and is tortured 24/7, around the clock. And for some reason that's not fully explained in the story, the torturing of this one child is absolutely necessary in order to maintain the equilibrium and the functioning of the rest of that society. So the cost of that version of greatness is the huge suffering of this one individual. Completely unjustified, it's not fair, but it just works. So if you want the good, that's the bad you have to accept. And I don't know if I would be prepared to accept that, really. I don't know. Maybe you would. I certainly wouldn't want to volunteer for it, that's for sure. The other thing I was thinking about, and this kind of harks back to Nazi Germany, is another documentary I was watching called Fascinating Fascism, because I'm looking into fascism at the minute. Fascinating Fascism, which is a documentary about an artist who, certainly at the time of the documentary, lived in Alsace, which is in France, on the French-German border. And Alsace is a relatively autonomous region of France now. People there tend to speak both French and German. There's a dialect which is unique to the place. And it was the first place, I think, or certainly one of the first places that was annexed during the Second World War when the Germans marched into France. And they basically said, all right, Alsace is part of Germany now. And they made people speak German, banned the speaking of French, or indeed Alsatian. Essentially just said it's part of Germany now. But as part of this documentary made by this artist in Alsace, he was talking about art, really, and he was showing clips of a Beethoven concert performed in a theatre in Alsace. And it's a beautiful concert. The orchestra is playing these Beethoven symphonies, and it's just fantastic stuff, amazing music. But of course the audience is 2/3 Nazis, and the first 3 or 4 rows are all people in SS uniforms and their wives, and dutifully listening to this fantastic music. And he says that for him, that music is perpetually tainted by the fact that it's these people who are watching it, particularly when you know that 3 kilometres down the road is a concentration camp in which Jews and other undesirables are being slaughtered, tortured and slaughtered. And he says that it's tainted by that, and he can't appreciate the music of Beethoven, and certainly not this video of the performance of Beethoven, because of that taint, that association. These people who are appreciating the greatness of this music are also complicit in the atrocities being carried out down the road. And it's in the same way that people talk about Nietzsche's philosophy or Wagner's music, that its association with the Nazis has tainted it in some way and reduced its greatness, perhaps. But in this particular documentary, it's quite well made. Alongside this footage of these Nazis watching this Beethoven concert and being appropriately appreciative of the fantastic music, it's intercut with footage from the concentration camp down the road. So you get, a few bars of some Beethoven and some appreciative Nazis, and then you get a few seconds of, really emaciated bodies being thrown into lime pits or being piled for burning. It's kind of dramatic footage, really. And he says it's that association is what's harming it for him, as I say, tainting it with him by association. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure at all. So there's something in there for me, and I don't like what I'm seeing here, to be honest with you. But there's something in the music and its association with these traumatic images, which make the music for me, I wouldn't say better, because it's not better, but it has another quality to it. Because it has this dark underside, it has a different kind of greatness to it. And it's not a greatness I want to applaud, it's just, for me, it's there in the music. It's almost as if the capacity for, in this case, music, to reach these kind of ethereal heights of something like spiritual fantasticness, spiritual greatness. I don't mean in a religious sense, but you know, some kind of aesthetic greatness. In order to reach those heights, it has to have this depth of horror to draw upon. You know what I mean? That there is this really, really dark underside to society that needs to exist in order for the heights of this kind of enlightened, spiritual, aesthetic greatness to appear. He doesn't agree with me. He says, you know, you can have this music without those undertones, and he may be right. But I think it does it affects the quality of the music. It expects to experience the music, certainly, knowing that. Just like reading Nietzsche, you know, if you read Genealogy of Morals, or if you listen to Wagner, it's different knowing the dark underbelly of a society which applauded that. You know what I mean? It affects how you listen to it. It affects how you read it, and I think potentially increases its evaluation as great in some way. Just to repeat, it's not great in the way I necessarily applaud, but one I can't help but recognise. And that's the cost of greatness, maybe. No, I think that's a cost not worth paying. I wouldn't agree to the idea of living in an Ursula K. Le Guin society in which a child was tortured just so everybody could live a happy, slappy, non-technologically advanced life, and I certainly wouldn't agree to, you know, the torture of millions of Jews and other undesirables just so I could have some Beethoven, or just so that my Beethoven could have that kind of quality to it. But there's something there for me about that kind of great, a fascist greatness, a greatness which requires suffering in order to appear on that kind of horizon.